Hello everyone, and welcome back to another True Crime Mysteries video. Thank you all for being here. Today we're discussing 3 solved cold cases that were only closed when the suspect came forward with a confession. Let's get into it. Number 1. Theodore John Conrad. 71-year-old Thomas Rendell had lived a very seemingly normal life. He'd been married to his wife for 40 years. They lived in Lynnfield, Massachusetts. He worked at a country club as a golf pro. His daughter was grown and had started a family of her own. But Thomas was hiding a secret, one that he only revealed in his final days. He'd been diagnosed with terminal lung cancer, and before his death on May 18, 2021, he shocked his family with a revelation they never thought possible. His name wasn't Thomas, their last name wasn't Rendell, and he'd been a wanted fugitive on the run from the FBI since 1969. It was on July 14, 1969 in Cleveland, Ohio, when the Society National Bank opened its doors on Monday morning and discovered there was $215,000 missing from their bank vault. An investigation of the stolen funds began and started with the last person who had closed the vault the previous Friday. 20-year-old teller Theodore John Conrad, who also wasn't among the bank employees that arrived early that morning, was the first suspect. The investigation revealed that Theodore had walked out of the bank after closing with a brown paper bag filled with cash and had simply walked away from his life. A warrant for his arrest went out, but with a 2-day head start, it left law enforcement at a disadvantage. Conrad is reported to have never contacted his family in Ohio ever again, leaving behind his parents and 3 siblings, but he wrote letters to a girlfriend, confirming he stayed in the U.S. with letters coming from Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., and Hawaii. In one of the letters, he revealed he had intentions to return home in 7 years, once the statute of limitations ran out on the theft. But he then discovered that wasn't going to happen on the federal charges of embezzlement. Conrad's crime didn't make much of a splash in the news. A week after the theft was Apollo 11's historic flight to the moon, which dominated the attention of all of the news outlets, giving Conrad even more time to escape and settle in somewhere with next to no one watching him. However, one U.S. Marshal made it his mission to find Conrad. John Elliott devoted his entire career to searching, eventually retiring in 1990. He passed on the investigation to his son, Peter Elliott, who was also a U.S. Marshal. Through the investigation and interviewing those who'd been close to Conrad, no one really believed he'd stolen the money in some sort of grand heist. He just wanted to do it to see if he could get away with it. The early belief that he could just return home after 7 years had been an indication that he hadn't really thought through his punishment for the crimes, and he hadn't really put much thought into leaving his whole life forever. Conrad was reported to have been obsessed with the movie The Thomas Crown Affair. That had come out in 1968 and had been filmed in Boston. It followed a bank robber played by Steve McQueen, who was a bank executive who walked out of a bank with $2.6 million. The film featured a character with expensive taste in luxury cars and high-end liquor, and Conrad wanted to emulate the character Thomas.
Conversations with several of his friends discussing the hypothetical prospect of being able to pull something like this off. He examined what type of security existed there, and this was just a challenge for him, as it were, to override this.
Teddy Conrad's plan was very simple. At lunch hour that day, he would leave and walk 1 block south to this spot here on St. Clair in Cleveland. And he would go to a liquor store, which was here 17 years ago. And he bought himself a bottle of Canadian Club, which of course was wrapped in a brown paper bag. At quitting time that day, he told his partner inside the vault that it was okay to go ahead and leave, that he would be along in a couple of minutes. Alone, Teddy allegedly put $215,000 in the bottom of the bag, put the liquor bottle on top, left the vault, shouted to the guard, and walked out.
$215,000, while at the time was a lot of money. It was equivalent to about $1.5 million in today's dollars. It wasn't enough to live off for the rest of his life, and at only 20, it certainly wasn't enough to retire off of. But after 5 decades, it was starting to look like a case that was never going to be solved until Peter Elliott saw an obituary that caught his attention. Thomas Rendell's obituary revealed details that closely matched Conrad's, and it made Elliott take a closer look into who this Rendell person was. Rendell started appearing in Massachusetts in 1970. There had been no record of him before that. From records, it appeared that Conrad walked into a Boston Social Security office with a new identity and got a Social Security card with a new forged identity. From there, he was able to live his life very normally, opening a bank account, working, paying taxes. No concern had ever been raised about Thomas Rendell. Rendell certainly hadn't lived an extravagant life. He spent several decades working as a car salesman. He and his wife had declared bankruptcy in 2014, and when he died, he didn't leave a substantial sum of money for his children to inherit. Once Elliott had enough evidence to connect Rendell to Conrad, he interviewed his family, who admitted that on his deathbed, Rendell revealed that he was Theodore Conrad, a wanted fugitive for a bank robbery. His wife Kathy made the decision not to go to law enforcement with the deathbed confession. She stated that she was still grieving the loss of her husband, and she said he was a great man. Many of his friends had similar sentiments. He was known as a nice, caring man who loved golf and cars. He was never known to badmouth anyone, raise his temper or voice, wasn't a drinker, and didn't gamble. But after it was revealed, little things started to make sense. Rendell always wore a beard. It was a running joke that in group photos, he would always put on sunglasses. He never talked about his family or where he grew up, but people just chalked it up to a bad childhood. A close family friend told the media, quote, "The man I knew didn't change all of a sudden because of something he did a lifetime ago. He was a good man, he was a good friend, and I think no less of him today than I did when all this came out, and I'd love to go play another round of golf with him." Conrad has surviving siblings who are relieved to know he lived a happy life. Theodore's parents had passed, never knowing what happened to their son, and much of their family had believed he had died after he disappeared for decades. After 52 years, the mystery of what happened to Theodore Conrad and the bank heist he committed has been closed. His family is not being looked at further. The money is believed to have been spent on bad investments before Conrad was married, and there won't be any criminal charges made for his family for not immediately going to law enforcement with the deathbed confession. Number 2. James Eric Crisp. It was on March 10, 2019 when Roger Lloyd Taylor vanished. Following an argument with his wife, the 48-year-old had got into his car to go pick her up from his daughter's house in Monroe County, Alabama. On the way, he texted his daughter that he was lost, and that was the last anyone heard from him. Days later, his car was recovered abandoned on the side of the road. For weeks, law enforcement and local search parties searched the area where his vehicle was found, but there was no sign of Roger.
It was heartbreaking. It's to the point now where he's been gone so long. If he was found alive, it'd be a miracle. But the probability of it is really, really low.
261 days. That's how long Alyssa Taylor's father has been missing.
There's no closure. I don't think that you could ever get closure not knowing what happened to your child, your brother, your uncle, your dad.
Taylor says the last couple of months have been filled with sorrow and anger. And with the holiday season rolling around, her family is leaning on each other.
We talk a lot more than we used to. I mean, it's sad that tragic events bring families together, but they really do. We all talk a lot more than we used to and talk about him and what he was like and what he used to do, and it always leads back to where he could be. And we want to give him what he deserves. What every family wants is, nobody wants nobody to die, but you want to be able to visit them and honor that person. And our family doesn't have that.
Oftentimes, the pain is too hard to bear.
I try not to think about it. You have time to grieve and cope with it a little bit, but then again, you don't. So some days you wake up and it's just like it just happened again.
His family revealed that they feared he'd had a medical emergency, as he'd only recently recovered from a heart attack and a stroke. which had left him with permanent physical mobility issues and memory lapses. His vehicle didn't show any signs of mechanical issues, and it's unclear what had happened to him. Weeks turned into months and then years. Without any new evidence, Roger's disappearance turned into a cold case, leaving his family with so many questions. A cold case that may have never been solved. However, in September 2022, a shocking revelation in the case came from a pastor who walked into the Monroe County Sheriff's Office and confessed to killing Roger Taylor. 37-year-old James Eric Crisp claimed that since the murder, he'd gone on to become a pastor and found God and needed to confess in order to go forward with his life. Crisp stated that in 2019, he'd gotten into a physical altercation with Roger and had killed him, then disposed of his body 10 miles from where his vehicle had been left.
James Eric Crisp walked into my office of his own free will and confessed to have killing Mr. Taylor.
48 hours later, 37-year-old James Eric Crisp was being led into Monroe County Justice Court for a bond hearing on one count of manslaughter for the death of 48-year-old Roger Lloyd Taylor of Sulligent, Alabama. According to the sheriff, Crisp said he killed Taylor on March 10, 2019, and disposed of the victim's body. Taylor's truck was discovered on Blair Cemetery Road in Monroe County a couple of days after he was reported missing. Searches since then have turned up no evidence, and the case went cold until this week.
He didn't reveal why or how he'd gotten into an altercation with Rogers, but Rogers' daughter doesn't believe that the two knew each other. She did reveal that she knew Crisp, and went on to say that Crisp had been involved in multiple search parties that had gone out to look for Roger in 2019. Crisp had a lengthy criminal history, and in 2019 he faced a 30-year prison sentence for various drug crimes, but entered God's House of Hope, a Christian rehab center, as part of his bail condition, got sober, and went on to become a pastor and counselor. After Crisp's confession, he was charged with manslaughter. Roger's children attended the bond hearing. Roger's daughter said that in a statement to the media, quote, "He looked me in the eye and told me he killed my dad. He didn't say he was sorry. He just said that he hoped one day I could find it in his heart to forgive him, but never even said he was sorry. He didn't have any emotions. When he was outside of the room, he was laughing with the jailer and walked in and acted all stone cold with me." She doesn't believe Crisp's confession is motivated by his newfound faith, but rather she believes that someone close to Crisp knew about the murder and was going to come forward to law enforcement. Crisp is said to be helping to locate Roger's body. However, the area in question had recently been subject to flooding and is said to have shifted the landscape and has made finding his body more difficult. At this time, Roger Taylor's body has yet to be found. Crisp has asked for the Taylor family's forgiveness. However, they said in a response, "If we can't have his body back, we won't have closure." Number 3, Michael Townson. It was October 12, 1991, when 43-year-old Linda Lois Little missed her shift at the Chart House restaurant in Daytona Beach, Florida. It was very unusual for Linda to miss work, and it was her co-worker and friend who reported her missing. She was last seen at Matey's Brig with a group of friends. At the bar, she told her friends that her boyfriend was coming to see her on the weekend, and they went through all the must-see spots in Daytona she had to take him to. That was also why it was so strange that Linda had disappeared, as it was clear to her friends that she had no plans to leave the area. Law enforcement canvassed the area and found a last sighting of the missing woman. Around 2 a.m., she was spotted riding her bike home and stopping at 7-Eleven. There she purchased a donut and a chocolate milk before heading in the direction of her apartment. Her apartment was found undisturbed, which led investigators to believe she'd been abducted shortly after leaving the 7-Eleven. Her body nor her bike were ever found. Her missing persons case eventually went cold once all leads were exhausted, and her family had always prayed for answers, but without a body, there was little hope of ever knowing what happened to Linda Little. For 3 decades, the case remained cold until Daytona Beach Police Department received a call from an incarcerated inmate recently transferred to the Tomoka Correctional Facility in Volusia County. 53-year-old Michael Townson was serving a life sentence for the brutal 2007 murder of Sherry Carmanto, and while serving his sentence, he, quote, found God and the Lord placed it in his heart to confess, and also revealed being close to the area he had committed another crime had weighed heavy on his heart, and he wanted to confess to a crime he committed in 1991. He alleged that he'd gone to Daytona Beach for his birthday and met a woman at a bar. He said that the two had a couple of drinks, but she had said something that made him snap, and he confessed to abducting, strangling, and burying the body of Linda Little. In addition to confessing to Linda's murder, he confessed to murdering 2 other women in Florida. At this time, investigations are still ongoing to corroborate these confessions. However, Daytona Beach had enough information to determine whether this confession was credible for Linda Little's murder. When asked why he killed the 4 women he confessed to murdering, he stated that he'd been abused by his father and grandfather as a child and blamed his mother and the other women in his life growing up for not protecting him, and grew to have a hatred towards women. 31 years after Linda's disappearance, her murderer was finally charged. Townson was indicted by a grand jury on October 24, 2022, on the charge of first-degree murder. An ongoing investigation is still going to recover Linda's body in the area where Townson admitted to burying her, as well as the other murders of the other women. If determined that all the killings he confessed to are credible, Townson will be classified as a serial killer. Already serving a life sentence, he will remain in prison for the rest of his life, or may face the death penalty if convicted. Linda's sister, Wanda Henson, thanked Townson for coming forward and confessing. She said at the press conference announcing his arrest that she was grateful to have answers about her sister, and went on to say that she forgives him.
Allow Linda's sister, Wanda, to say a few words if she would like.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the media being here to let our police department get the recognition that they deserve, and our state attorney's office and our sheriff's department through the years, staying on this case and never, ever, ever giving up. And I really appreciate y'all. Words can't express it. Claire's been right there from the very beginning, and appreciate that. And we were just talking about the actions of one person. We need to stop the cycle. We need to put out more love and stop the cycle of, because just one man's actions has affected generations now. Linda's granddaughter now has 4 little kids of her own that never saw her grandmother, never see her great-grandmother. We just need to stop the cycle. But I really appreciate David Donardi here staying on this case all these years, and that's I give you love.
Well, that is going to be it for this video. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end. As always, if you want to support the channel, the easiest way is to hit the like button. You can also subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss my next upload. Other ways to support the channel are joining my Patreon or channel membership. I also have merch, and you can find all the links in the description box, plus a few extras. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter for more. But with all that being said, thank you so much for being here and supporting what I do. It is very appreciated. That is it for me. I will see you on the next one. Bye for now.